Thanks, sir. All right. Now here we are. Everybody can hear me now. All right. Let's go to, last time we were here, not last week, but the week before, we talked about John and John's being beheaded by Herod. And Herod's big belief, it's interesting the way you look at it, it's kind of goes backward in time. It talks about this, what's happening. Herod thought that Jesus was John who had been resurrected from the dead. And then it goes backward into the story as to how John lost his life in the first place. And Herod's, as Herod feared the people and kept John safe, he was not immune to the pressures from even within his own family. And he ended up at the behest of his daughter, who was being manipulated by the mother, to have John beheaded and the head brought on a platter. But we know that this is because Herodias was a wicked woman, and her daughter was no different. Anybody that would listen to that and acquiesce that's wickedness. So here's John having lost his life, and Jesus having lost his first cousin, and the blow. But John had even said that his ministry was beginning to decrease. And John, as anyone else is who has lived a life of service to God, is ready to go on for their reward. But anyway, John has been beheaded, and Herod believes Jesus to be John resurrected. This was not uncommon. As a matter of fact, in the first century church, there was a great belief in the resurrection of not just within Christendom, but within the world itself, that there are people who had been resurrected to live another life. I'm trying to remember if it was Vespasian, Domitius, that was believed to be the resurrection of Nero, because of the persecution that went on and the actions that were undertaken by that emperor. All right. So we have this has been the case, and let's go to Matthew 14. I'm going to write these up here so you can write them down if you wish. Come on. So, okay. So we have Matthew 14, verses 13 through 21. And you have Mark chapter 6, verses 30 through 44. And then you have Luke 9, 10 through 17. And then, rounding it out, you actually have John, verses 1 through 14. It's John 6, 1 through 14. An interesting fact that out of all of the miracles that are listed in the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the feeding of the multitude is the only one that's repeated in John. Now, John has other miracles that he presents in his book, but this is the only miracle out of the other three that John records in his own book. All right? So an interesting thing, and I think, Kenny brought this up one time. Next week, we're going to, for probably the first part of the class, we're going to talk about the idea behind the book of John, and we're going to go into that a little bit to kind of show the difference between the Gospel of John and the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because there's some pretty big differences in the way that they portray Jesus, all of them being accurate and inerrant, but the way they present Jesus is different than the way John presents Jesus. So next week, I think we're going to talk about that. So, all right. So anyway, let's go to Matthew chapter 14, and we all know the story, but let's look at this and see what how Matthew records this story, this narration of the events. In verse 13, and when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from the place there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. We kind of went into that last time. This is after John has been beheaded, and Jesus, of course, is upset by this. He loved John, and John was a servant of God, and we should all be sorrowful when a good servant of God goes home to meet their reward. We lose them, however, of course, they're gained by eternity. So Jesus hears about this. He withdraws from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. And we talked about this. When the crowds hear it, what did they proceed to do? They follow him there. All right, they can't listen. When Jesus speaks with the power and authority that he spoke, it moved people, and they wanted to continue to hear it. Everything he spoke enriched them in some way, shape, or form. They wanted to hear more. He tries to get away from them. They're not going to hear about it. They're going to continue to follow him. And I thought this was kind of, you can imagine being in this boat, and as you set out from this boat, I don't know where exactly he was, but no matter where he was, you could see the crowd. You can see the crowd decide to get ready, and they start moving, and you see them move around and meet you where you are. But he says, when he went ashore, he saw another great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed the sick. Now it was evening. The disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place." In other words, it's far removed from any towns or villages that might have been able to give sustenance, any merchants that might be able to sell them food. The day is over. Now send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves. Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish. And he said, "Bring them here to me." Now he's talking about the food, not the people. But he orders the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looks up to heaven and said a blessing. Don't record what that is. But the Jews had blessings that they would recite. They were rote blessings, kind of like, now I lay me down to sleep. Thank you, Lord, for this food. They were blessings that they recited on when they woke up, before they went to bed, before they broke bread, whatever it might be. Then he breaks the bread and gives it to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. So now they've become servants, right? They're servants in true sense. They're serving the people with what they had. I think this is a good lesson for us. We may not have much, but what we have, what do we do with it? We give. We serve other people with it. If I've got 2 sandwiches and there's a fellow there that doesn't have 1 sandwich, ask him if he wants a sandwich. If I've got 1 sandwich, you want half my sandwich. It's simple things like this. But this is what the people needed. So what do? We give people what they need. It doesn't mean that we fulfill every fantasy and every desire, but we give them what they need. They needed food, had nowhere to go, so he gives them this food. And they all ate and were satisfied, and they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So you have a crowd of over 5,000 people there, and they're all fed through the power of God with 5 loaves and 2 fish. No one can deny this is a miracle. There is no way, I don't care how small you divide that loaf and fish, you're not going to be able to feed over 5,000 people with it, no matter what you do. Only through the power of God can you do that. And I think this is interesting that John, this is a miracle that's recorded in all 3 of these, but John includes it as well, as a true example of who Jesus is. Jesus is the Son of God. Now, how does this translate over with Jesus being the Son of God and then proceeding to feed the people? What is God? Who is God? He is the fount of blessing, right? Look back to the children of Israel in the desert. Who fed them? God. Could they do anything of themselves? Remember, they had already eaten everything that they had taken out of Egypt. Now, they walked out with wealth beyond measure. It was just an incredible amount. Remember that people were coming out and pressing things into their hands. They were going out and they were giving them livestock. They were giving them all of these things, these garments, this gold, everything like that. And they gave them all of this. But guess what? That only lasts for so long. Now they're in the desert. They've exhausted all of the supplies that they took out of Egypt. So who do they have to rely on? Give us this day our daily bread. Yes, ma'am. They sacrificed it. Yeah, they didn't have anything. They had eaten everything that they had taken out with them. So what did they have to have? They had to have God. God had to provide sustenance for them. He had to provide food for them. There's nothing else for them. What do they do here? What does he do here? What does God proceed to do? He feeds them. Why? Couldn't feed themselves. And I think this is one of the big reasons that John includes this in his account of the Gospels, is that Jesus is the Son of God, and that's the main thrust of the book of John, is that Jesus is the Son of God. That's the lesson that's hammered over and over again. Jesus was able to do this. Why? Because he is the Son of God. He had power and authority given from his Father. And it's a pretty amazing thing. And this is something that, you remember, most miracles, who was the recipient of most miracles? Who was the beneficiary of most miracles? One person, maybe two, depending on who was healed and what was the purpose behind it. This is a miracle that benefited 5,000 plus people all from everywhere. Because they happened to be there and they happened to be in the presence of Christ. They were the beneficiary of a miracle that cannot be denied. And I think this is important because once you saw this, if you weren't convinced by this, I'm not sure exactly what is going to convince you of the power and authority of Jesus Christ. But to see this happen.
It doesn't state that it excluded those who were not Jewish either.
No, if you were there and you heard it, and you were there and you were present, and you were hungry, you were fed, no matter who you were. And let's be honest, almost all of his crowds contained at least few mockers and scoffers, because that was the case almost everywhere he went. There were those in the crowd who mocked, or those in the crowd who argued, or who tried to basically throw a monkey wrench into the ministry. And there were people who were there. Did they receive the benefits of that miracle? If they were there and they were hungry, if they asked for food, that's what happened. All right, so they were the recipients of all of these things. And I think this is important in the idea of John including this in his gospel message, is that Jesus is the Son of God, and it was through the power of God that Jesus was able to do what he did. All right, so you have 5,000 men plus these women and children. All of them are fed through these 5 loaves and 2 fish. God provides our physical comforts. He when Jesus said, pray in this way, give us this day our daily bread, we have to acknowledge that he is the one that puts food in our bellies. We might like to claim that ability for ourselves. Well, I went to the grocery store and I picked it out and I brought it home and I prepared it and I put it on the plate and I ate it. But let's be honest, at the end of the day, who is it that provides sustenance? It's God. He gives it every single day. And the benefit is not so much that it's that we acknowledge him in that. Remember, this is the problem with the Israelites. They had gotten to the point where they were acknowledging other gods as being the founder of the feast, so to speak. They had displaced God as the fount from whom all blessings flow, and they had substituted the various gods and goddesses and pagan idols, and that was who was responsible for their harvest and responsible for their children and responsible for all of the good things. And God was tired of being pushed to the side, and he punished them severely for it. All right, anybody got anything they want to add? Yes, sir.
That just makes me think about sometimes it'll be weeks when it hasn't rained, but you go out in the morning and there's dew on the grass.
Yeah.
So God is always going to provide for his creation,
Yes.
whether it's through the means of making sure that a supply chain can get food to a Kroger,
Yeah.
or maybe a deer falls dead in the front yard and there you got deer. I don't know, whatever it's
Yeah.
going to be, God's
Yeah.
going to provide for his creation.
Absolutely.
And especially the creation that he loves.
Yes.
So his children will always be provided for, which is really nice to think about. Like if his creation is important enough to make sure dew lands on the blades of grass, to make sure that it's still getting provided for, even in that small way, how much more so for those who he sent his son to die for?
I agree, and let's think about this. Let's remember that we are a part of that method by which God provides for his children. We are part of that. If I have extra and I know my brother or sister is going hungry, then it is a sin for me to not do what I can to provide for that brother or sister in Christ. If I find out that my sister sits in the pew with me, I find out, and she may be too proud to say anything, and she might not want it, but I find out that she's struggling a little bit. And I look in my freezer, and I look in my refrigerator, and I look in my pantry, and I say, and listen, I understand, we've got a pantry here, and it is absolutely first for the brethren. If there's anyone in the community we can help, absolutely. But if I find out that she's doing that, do I say, well, go talk to the benevolence person and make sure they get you some food? What is my real responsibility? It falls on me. It's for me to do.
And that's another example of why we're supposed to be intertwined with each other's lives.
Absolutely.
Because if somebody is too proud to say something, that's not an excuse for us not to know about
Yeah.
their lives.
And see, the disciples hadn't quite figured out, because remember what he said, send them away so that they can go and buy food. Now, that's a perfectly logical response. Now, I don't want to lay too much at their feet, but the idea here that hey, they're hungry. It's getting late. The stores are going to close. It's going to be too late for them to get back to it's a remote place. They need to have time to go to the closest village, find some food so that they can prepare food for themselves. And what does Jesus say? Well, bring me the food. Let me do. Yeah. God's getting ready to provide for all of these people. Mm-hmm.
What comes to my mind is scripture where it says, if you don't work, you don't eat.
Sure.
And I also know of a situation with the Church of Christ where they had, and everybody used to talk about the person all the time. They would say that she would not go and work. She would look to the church to provide
Mm-hmm.
for all her needs.
Mm-hmm.
And they thought she should go and work. But they never would talk to her about it.
Right.
And so, well, I talked to her about it.
Uh-huh.
I did. And she said she had a son that had a sickle cell.
Oh, yeah.
And she said she couldn't stay on the job because she would always have to take him to the hospital. But when I talked to her about it, she did get up and do something.
Right. Right.
So I think sometimes we need to look at the scriptures carefully and apply the scriptures also as well. Because we do have situations where people just,
They can't.
We need
They
to know
can't.
the person.
And that again, that gets into the idea. If we don't know each other well, if we're not, listen, we're called a family. We're called the family of God for a reason. We call each other brother and sister for a reason. I can't truthfully call somebody a brother or sister. Now, I understand what I mean by this. Within the local congregation, it'd be difficult if I don't know them. And we need to know one another. And we need, for one, let's look at both sides of this. Number one, we can't be so closed off and guarded against letting people know what's going on in our lives. I know pride goes into a lot of it. We don't want people to, I know a lot of people, I don't want anybody to know my business. I can appreciate that up to a point, but when your life is being negatively impacted by things that are going on, you need to let someone know. You need to let people know. Because our brethren stand ready to assist, but they can't unless they know something is happening. And when we find out something like that, we go to them and say, look, what's happening? What's going on? Is there a situation that we don't know about? Is there something happening that we need to know about so that we can do better to serve? That's should always be first and foremost.
If you don't let me know, you take away my opportunity to serve.
Yeah.
If I want to serve and you don't make me aware, or I don't seek out
Mhm.
the information, it robs me of my opportunity to serve. It may be the only way or the best way that I serve.
Yeah.
It may be the talent that I can bring. And if you rob me of that opportunity,
Well, we don't do so that someone else can do back for us.
no.
That's the best. That's the true definition of benevolence is when you give, when the person that you're giving to has no ability to repay it, and that's not the purpose behind it in the first place. We don't give so that later on we can call in a favor. That's not what giving is. Giving is so that we can render service to show love. We talked about that in class this morning. The idea of love will provoke us to do good works. Sometimes those good works are feeding. But we think about the disciples. They say, send them away. I mean, it makes perfect sense. They need to go and get food. And Jesus said, we're going to feed these people. Figuratively, that's what he says. We're going to feed these people. Bring me the food. Have them sit down. And he breaks the food, breaks it, gives it a blessing from God, and then they distribute this food. And can you imagine being there and watching them start? Have you ever been in a church potluck and you're the last person in line, and you there's something you want in that line, and you keep looking at it, and people keep getting a little bit more of it and a little bit more of it, and you're hoping maybe there's a little bit of that there when I get up there. And you can imagine those people, 5,000, and they're sitting back and they're watching them start over there, and they're watching them start over there, and you're thinking, there's no way there's not going to be enough food left. And they just keep coming and keep coming and keep coming. How much and they're just handing it out. in play, however, in baskets or whatever it is they're holding it with. And does anybody want any more? Does anybody want any more? And then after they're done, they start taking up the leftovers, and there's 12 baskets of leftovers. No one can deny that this was had to have been a. And see, John doesn't describe as miracles. All of them, John describes them as signs. And see, that's important. It's a sign. What was this a sign of? Number one, God provides. Number two, Jesus is the man who speaks and has power and authority on behalf of God. Everything on this earth, under heaven and on this earth, is under his authority, including material matter, which is just it's just jaw-dropping. Yes.
This is one of the lessons to us that God can take a little and multiply. Remember the few men that was chosen to go into battle?
Gideon and his men, yes.
Right.
Yes.
I hear people say, well, I just said.
Yeah. I don't have that much. I'm, well, remember what is it? I'm trying to remember which of was it Judah? They were small in stature but mighty in power. One of the tribes, but it says they're outsized, and they may be small in number, but they're outsized in their I'm trying to remember one of the churches in Asia. He says the same thing about. He says about one of the tribes, and he says it about one of the churches. You're poor, but you're not poor. You have the ability that you don't know you have. You think you are poor, but you're actually wealthy. Well, you think about that in terms of the church, right? God took a small handful of people. I mean, really, the disciples of Jesus Christ after he was crucified numbered actually very small, because remember, most of them left him. So he takes a small group of people, and what does he do with them? He creates a church, and that church begins to overflow, and and pretty much you've got 12 baskets of leftovers from this, what God has been able to do, because God has power, yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about the widow's widow.
Yeah, yeah.
It's powerful then, and it's powerful today. You don't hear any examples about the ones who gave great amounts.
It didn't require anything of them. There was no real sacrifice made by those people. And they gave out of their abundance. If you've got $1 billion and you write, no offense, if you've got $1 billion and you write a check for $100,000, I appreciate the gesture, but that's not really sacrificial giving. You got a couple of mites and you give the 2 mites. That's some faith right there. It says she gave out of her pocket. She gave all that she had. They gave out of their wealth.
The example today that we still use that gift that
Yeah.
she gave.
Yep.
Very, very powerful.
I'll tell you what. I've been in situations where I know what's going on in someone's life, and I've counted the money, and I don't keep track of anything. But I've seen checks laid in the treasury that I know that, and usually it's some little old widow lady or little old widower, and I know they don't have a lot. They're subsiding on a pension maybe or Social Security, and they put a check in there, and I know their situation. I know that's outsized contribution right there. That represents a significant portion of what they're bringing in. It's sacrificial giving, and you tell me the Lord isn't happy, isn't pleased with that? Absolutely.
My dad used to say, I will not offer my God what costs me nothing.
True. In the other account where he feeds the multitudes, it says there's a little boy. What did he give up? Gave up his lunch. He gave up his lunch so that everybody could get fed. So yeah, there's a bunch of lessons in this, and I think sometimes we kind of gloss over it. Yes, he did present a miracle, but the significance behind that miracle is sometimes, I think, not necessarily gone into too much. But I think we've done pretty good with it there today. All right, let's continue on in Matthew chapter 14. Continue in Matthew chapter 14 because that's the easiest one to read. Continues on. He says, those who ate were about 5,000 men besides women and children. So now, hear what happens. Immediately after they've eaten this meal, they made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he, again, to try to dismiss the crowds. Listen, you've heard everything I'm going to say, and I've fed you. It's time to go to your homes. And I think this is important because he wants them to go home, and he doesn't want them to follow him around. He wants them to go home and put these things into action. It's good enough to hear a lesson, but you've got to do something with it. He wants them to go and tell their family members about this. He wants them to go tell the other people in their village or their other town about what's going on. When he says he dismisses them, it's not, well, I'm done with you. It's go in peace and remember what I've told you. Remember all of that you've heard. All right? So he goes and he dismisses the crowds, and after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. We talk about this a lot of times with a preacher's luncheon. He says sometimes you just need to get away to yourself. Jesus did it, and there's nothing wrong with somebody saying, look, I just need some time for me. And I like it when Jesus had time by himself. Where did he go? He went up to talk to his Father and spend time in prayer. You know, and he gives us an indication about how we're to pray, but I would dearly love to be a fly on the wall listening to the conversation between him and his Father, and the communication and the kinship that goes in between, because he's speaking to him both as his son, Logos made flesh, but he's also talking to him as a man to the God that created his physical body. So there's two methods of communication, okay? So he goes up on this mountaintop and he goes to pray by himself. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. So it's the evening time, and if you're out on the water, a lot of times in the evening, the wind will start to pick up a little bit. But anyway, I don't know if he could see them from where he was. I really wanted to look and see, because there's maps that talk about this. I'm not sure if he could see the boat from where he was on that. And the idea of a mountaintop is we're not talking about the Colorado Rockies type of mountaintop, but it is a very high area in that land. So I don't know if he could see the boat, knew where the boat was, but the boat was a long way from shore because they had gone across before him to the other side. All right. So in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. He wants to catch up to him. He doesn't want to walk all the way around because who knows how long that would be. He says, there they are. I can catch up to him. You know, they're just being beaten around by the waves. They probably had maybe even anchored to kind of wait it out, let everything kind of die down. But here he goes. He just sets off from the, and you wonder. This is just one of those things that I think about. I wonder if he gets to that water and just thinks about it and prays about it first, or if he just matter of factly just starts strolling and just starts walking across that water. I don't know. Either way, it's just super cool to think about. She's just awesome. So he comes to them and he's walking on the sea, and you can imagine what that was like. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. Of course they were. Had they ever seen someone walking on the water before? Nowhere have we found that they had ever seen this before in their lives. And what does it say? It says they were terrified and said what? It's a ghost. All right, so they're still buying into this Jewish mythology and all of these old wives' tales and fables and stuff like that. So they think they're seeing a ghost out there. Maybe one of the many hundreds of people who had died on the water. It happens all the time. Boats capsize, people die. This is one of the spirits of someone who died on this water, and here it is. And I don't know if they thought it was a dangerous thing or they were scared, whatever it might be. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I." Knowing they would know who he's talking about. Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid. How many times did Jesus say throughout the scriptures, do not be afraid, be not afraid, do not fear? Why? Because I'm here. You don't need to be afraid, I'm here. No matter where he was, they were going to be safe. Because his time had not yet come. They were safe when they were with Jesus. Do not be afraid. Not only do not be afraid that nothing might happen, but don't be afraid because it is me. You don't need to be fearful for anything else. All right? So Peter answers him, saying, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." What do you think Peter was getting? What do you think was going through Peter's mind at this particular point? What's going on? I've had people say that he's not necessarily challenging Jesus, but sort of like issuing sort of an ultimatum. Well, if it's you and not a ghost, then ask me to come out to you. Some people say merely that he wanted Jesus to show him some sign that it was, in fact, him. lots of different, I've read a bunch of different opinions, a lot of different explanations, and not all of them are satisfying, but there's certainly a bunch of them out there. What do you think about when Peter issues this statement to Jesus? Yep.
We've seen a few times Peter's a very impetuous person
Mhm.
as well, and I think his faith is very genuine in every scenario, but sometimes it's not very well thought out.
Could be.
Like when he cut off the servant's ear.
Yeah. He doesn't think things through.
Right. So I've always attributed this a little bit to his, faith coupled with impetuosity.
Uh-huh.
It's like, I'm going to walk on water.
It could be. He sees Jesus walking on the water, and he's listen. If it's Jesus, then I can walk on water with him. And I think that's incredible. The faith that if it is in fact Jesus, and he tells me to walk on water, then I can walk on water. There's no doubt in his mind that he has that ability to cause Peter to do the exact same thing. And I think you're right in that way, that Peter's faith is genuine. He said, if your faith is genuine, nothing is going to be denied you. And we got to read that in the correct way, obviously. But I think his faith is incredibly genuine. And I think you're right in the fact that he's very impetuous, and maybe this is an opportunity to maybe perchance take part in a miracle that, I don't know. Yeah, can you?
Similar thing, just, his
Yeah.
immaturity, but it's an innocent faith, or an innocent,
Right.
belief that, like you said, Jesus, he knew that if it was Jesus, then Jesus could allow him to walk with
Right.
him on the water.
Yeah.
I tend to like that idea because that's what I want to believe about Peter.
Yeah.
It's that
Want to give him the benefit of the doubt.
in fact, he would not have even spoken to the Lord if he didn't have faith. And
Right.
some idea that was him. But to believe that all Jesus had to say was one word and he would be able to do that thing, to me speaks that his faith is beginning to mature
Yeah.
a great deal.
Sure. I think that's.
I think he was trying to confirm it was not a ghost.
It could be. It could very well be. And if you look at what he says, look what he says. If we take the wording the way that it's given to us, which there's no reason not to, he says, "If it is you," what does he tell him to do? Command me to come out to you on the water. Command me. So his faith is genuine, and what he's doing is he's giving it back to Jesus. Look, if it's you, tell me to come out. And so what does Jesus do? It's interesting. He says, "Come on ahead," right?
That right there just shows that he knew that he wasn't going to be able to do it unless Jesus commanded him.
Absolutely. If he got out of that boat and Jesus hadn't told him to, then he's just a subject to. Now, he had people that were going to help him, and I'm no doubt in my mind that Jesus would help him get back on that boat. But if he just simply clambered out without any expression of faith or anything like that, then Peter's going to sink like the stone that he's named after. That's exactly what's going to happen. All right? But he says, "Command me to come out," because he knows if Jesus says come out, then he'll get out and he'll walk on that water the same exact way that Jesus is walking on that water. I do. I think it is. I think he affirms his faith in Jesus, and he may be wanting to establish, is this Jesus? It's not a ghost, because they still very much believed in a lot of the stuff that, well, look, people even today believe in, right? Yeah.
Well, they had to recognize his Lord.
Maybe. Maybe.
So, I mean, if you heard him speak, you know it was him. You don't know what he looked like.
I think, yeah.
What his personage was at that
Yeah,
time.
the wind is blowing and everything like that. But we got that. Let's talk about it, because we'll finish this up and then we're going to be done for the afternoon. He says, "Come." So Peter still, with his belief in Christ, still has his entire faith in Jesus' command to do what he says he do. So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water. I mean, it's like it's the end result of faith is what we ask for is going to happen. So it says he got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. Now you think about this. Here's this poor guy. He's probably never been very far away from home, and now he's in this middle of this body of water, and the waves are crashing and the wind is blowing and all of these things, and now compared to where he was however long ago, where he is right now. He's walking on water at the command of the Son of God. So he's come a long way. But his human nature catches up to him, doesn't it? And that's the sad thing. But it's not fatal for Peter. His lack of faith in the garden was not fatal to Peter. His I wouldn't say disbelief, but his skepticism in regards to Jesus's coming out on the other side correctly wasn't fatal to Peter. So thankfully, this did not end badly for Peter, but it just goes to show what happens when we have faith and then our faith begins to fail us. And we allow our faith to pull us away. Because what happens? He says, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. So it's interesting. Jesus said, come. He gets out and comes, but what happens? When did he begin to sink? Yeah, when he began to be afraid and he looked around. He was, and what happens? What happens now? We have to be careful that we don't let our circumstances pull our eyes away from where we need to be, because that's when our faith begins to fail us. I take that back. I don't want to say that our faith fails us. We begin to lose our faith. Our faith begins to be shaken because our faith will not fail us. We fail our faith. That's the problem. It lies with us. Faith is faith, and when we allow it to, when it permeates us, whatever we want to do is going to happen. But man, we start taking our eyes off of where we need to be, the destination, and you better believe our faith is going to fail. So he says, he begins to sink and he cries out, Lord, save me. Well, when we cry out to the Lord to save us, what is he going to do? Jesus immediately reached out his hand, took hold of him, and saying, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Because that's when you began to sink, is when you began to doubt. You looked around and you said, the waves are more powerful than the commandment of my Savior. The wind is more powerful than my Savior. The storm is more powerful. The crashing seas, my physical surroundings are more powerful than the command of Jesus Christ. Well, guess what happened?
But he still had enough faith to know that the Lord was going to save him.
Who did he yell out to? Wasn't his buddies in the boat?
Well, no one else got out.
Yeah. All right, and so when they had gotten into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. Well, yeah. If the miracle with the fish and the loaves didn't tell you, then certainly this is something you can't deny it. Again, you know where you are. You're in a boat. You have two people walking on water. One of them is a man, just an everyday guy, and the Son of God causes him to walk on the water and saves him when he begins to sink. You cannot deny who this is. Okay, we're going to stop there. I appreciate everybody's attention and everybody's input. I really do. Next week, again, we're going to talk. I got a few things I want to talk about John because of the difference between John and the rest of what's called the Synoptic Gospels. We're going to talk about the book of John and some differences and the purpose behind it being written. The ideas that John was trying to get across to the people who would be reading the gospel that bears his name. All right, let's sing our songs number 772. Is there anybody that we can pray for this afternoon? Yeah. All right. Let's stand and sing 772. Wait, dear brother, oh, why do you tarry so long? Your Savior is waiting to give you the place